Happy Sabbath. How are you all? I hope you all enjoy your week and enjoy the sunshine and the blessing from God. Tonight I continue to pray that the good Lord will continue to shine on you, to bless you with love, joy, and peace. And now tonight we are going to continue with the book of Genesis. This time is in chapter 37. Now let's read verse 1. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. Now attention switches from the hill country of Seir, where Esau's descendants live, to Canaan, where Jacob settles. Jacob is back in the land of promise, but is still dwelling there as a foreigner, like his father and grandfather before him. Just like them, he was waiting for the fulfillment of the promises of God. Verse 2. And this is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flock. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Well, this is the account of Jacob and his family. It is still Jacob's story, the last part of his story. This chapter introduces the final part of Genesis. This time it's about Joseph, who is next to the youngest of Jacob's sons. However, although Jacob was not the oldest in the family, Jacob gives Joseph the status of the firstborn, a special privilege that sets Joseph apart from his brother. Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things that his brothers were doing. By reporting his brothers, Joseph alienates himself from them. His actions suggest that his attitude toward moral behavior was different from his older brothers. Let's read verse 3. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. While Jacob may have favored Joseph over Joseph's brother because Joseph was Rachel's older son and apart from Benjamin, the youngest one. And he made him a beautiful robe. And this gift suggests Joseph was a special one in the family. So what kind of clothing is that? In 2 Samuel 13:18, associates such distinctive clothing with royalty. The fact that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children indicate that he had learned nothing from his own experience growing up. Joseph's privileged position became a source of deep hatred within the family. His brother despised him. Now let's read on, verse 5. One night Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. While the author doesn't tell us who gave Joseph the dream, but we can see that throughout Genesis, dreams are revelations from God. Verse 8, his brothers responded, So, you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think You will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Joseph's brother became angry because in the dream, the brothers' bundles of grain were bowing down to Joseph's bundle. Furthermore, the father gave Joseph a special coat, a coat that royalty wears. The idea that Joseph might rule over them fueled the hatred of him. We know that the dream was later fulfilled, right? Verse 9. Soon Joseph had another dream. And again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have another dream, he said. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bow low before me. 10. This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers. But his father scolded him. What kind of dream is that? He asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come bow to the ground before you? 11. But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. Joseph's second dream reinforces the idea that he will rule over the members of his family. That fact that among those who would bow down to him would include his father and mother causes his father to scold him. Although Jacob scolded Joseph, but he kept the matter in his mind. This suggests that Jacob did not dismiss the idea entirely. Jacob may well have remembered how his father Isaac had blessed him, promising that his brothers would bow down to him. His father Isaac had blessed him and said, let me read, let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Your mother indicates Leah because Rachel's already dead. Verse 12. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. 13. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them. I'm ready to go, Joseph replied. Jacob's oldest son went to pasture their father's flock at Shechem. Shechem is a familiar name, familiar place, isn't it? It was the place where their sister Dinah was raped, and then the brothers took revenge and killed every male citizen in Shechem. Jacob's older sons were there longer than expected. Therefore, Jacob remembering the history there and worried about them. So he sent Joseph to check on them. Sometimes I think Jacob is really out of touch with his sons. If Joseph was hated by his brothers, why did he send Joseph to look for them? Didn't he remember how vindictive his older sons were? But Joseph was obedient. He followed his father's order. Verse 14. Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, Jacob said. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. What are you looking for? He asked. I'm looking for my brothers, Joseph replied. Do you know where they are pasturing the sheep? Yes, the man told him. They have moved on from here, but I heard them saying, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. So after a minor difficulty, in which Joseph couldn't find his brothers and had to seek help from a stranger, finally Joseph found his brothers in Dothan. Why did they leave Shechem and go north to Dothan? Well, as shepherds, they go where there's water and greens for their sheep, right, or the animals. Perhaps there was no more water or grass in Shechem. So where's Dothan? Dothan is about 13 miles north of Shechem. Let's read on. 18. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Well, Jacob's playing favorite among his sons, plus Joseph's tattle-telling on his older brothers, and then his dreams insisting that his brother, even his parents, would someday bow down to him, was like adding fuel after fuel to an existing fire. They were very angry. They were furious. So what happened? When they saw Joseph coming, they were burning with fire of hatred, and so they schemed to kill him. And then after that, they said they would throw him into one of the cisterns. Just some side notes. What are cisterns? Are they wells? Well, wells actually tap into underground water, whereas cisterns are for storing rainwater. The area of Dothan averaged about 24 to 28 inches of rainwater annually. So if they could collect even 20% of this runoff water from half an acre land, they could supply about 5,000 sheep of water for the year. That's why they have cisterns around there. So how big are those cisterns? Well, they're about the size of half of an Olympic-sized pool, quite big. Well, so Joseph's brothers found a dried cistern, and they were planning to throw him inside after they killed him. Verse 21. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without a laying hand on him. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. This initial plan was interrupted by Reuben, who wanted to save Joseph from the other brothers' hands. Why Reuben wanted to save Joseph? Remember, Reuben slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and lost his firstborn title. Some scholars guessed that Reuben wanted to regain his father's favor, and therefore he tried to save Joseph. Maybe he hoped in doing that, Jacob would reinstate him as firstborn son. Let's read on to see whether Reuben succeeded in saving Joseph. Verse 23. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. At some point in time, while they were eating, they saw a caravan approaching from the north. Well, Dothan, where they were camped, is near a common trade route to Egypt. This was a caravan of merchants coming from Gilead and carrying a variety of goods to sell and trade. Various kind of valuable, multi-purpose gum, also referred to as spices, balm, and myrrh, made from plants in the region. Seeing a passing caravan gave Joseph's brother another idea about how to dispose of him. Now verse 26. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing a brother? We have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of his cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. Judah had a brilliant idea. Perhaps his conscience was bothering him. So instead of killing his brother, he suggested they should sell him to these merchants. They all agreed and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, also called Midianites, for 20 shekels. So who were these traders? We see here that they were called Midianites also. So were they Ishmaelites or Midianites? If you look at Judges, the book of Judges chapter 8, Ishmaelites and Midianites were used interchangeably. Perhaps they look they look similar to each other. If you recall the previous chapters, that Ishmael was Hagar's son, right? And Midian was Keturah's son. Who is Keturah? Do you remember? Well, Abraham remarried after Sarah died, and Keturah was the new wife. Well, a theory deduced from some Jewish rabbi that Hagar and Keturah were the same person. Well, I really don't know whether it is true, but we don't have to decide, right? Either way, both groups were descended from Abraham. Midianites through Keturah, Ishmaelites through Hagar. Therefore, the ancestor of these two peoples were half-brothers to one another and to Isaac, right? And they were uncles to Jacob. And so these traders were second or third cousins to Joseph and his brothers. They were all relatives. Verse 29. Sometimes later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented. "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Then the brothers killed the young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in his blood. They sent the beautiful robe to the father with this message: "Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" Reuben had no part in the plan to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. When he returned to the pit, expecting to find Joseph there and to rescue him, but Joseph was no longer there. He was surprised and angry that Joseph was gone. Although it was Reuben who intended to save the life of Joseph initially, but it is Judah who saved him at the end. Nevertheless, they finally got rid of the brother they hated. So what are they going to tell their father? The brothers had to create some story to their father, right? So they told a lie and said that a ferocious animal had killed Joseph and showed him their brother's beautiful robe, now bloody. On side note, were there really wild animals during that time? Scholars found bones of Asiatic lion, Syrian brown bear, leopard, and wild boar. So the story would be believable to the father, right? Verse 33. The father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces." Then Joseph tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I will go to my grave mourning for my son, he would say, and then he would weep. Why Jacob tore his clothes? This custom dates far back in ancient history. Clothes represented a person's personality. To tear them indicated a grievous inner hurt. Jacob mourned that the blood-stained coat is all that was remained of his beloved son Joseph. On seeing it, Jacob tore off his own coat and exchanged it for sackcloth. He was mourning deeply. Do you know what happened to Joseph foreshadows all that will happen to the sons of Jacob, or I should say descendants of Jacob? They eventually became slaves, right, after Joseph died. Another interesting observation. While Jacob was mourning for his son, he said, "In mourning will I go down to grave to my son," which he didn't know what he said was prophetic. Here in his grief, he said he would go down, meaning to die and join his beloved son. But this story of Joseph ending with Jacob, the father, really going down, not meaning death, but going down south to Egypt to join his son there. Verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianite trader arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. Potiphar, who is he? He was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Although the exact nature of Potiphar's post is uncertain, he was probably responsible for overseeing the detention of other important officials when Pharaoh imprisoned them. This probably explained why Potiphar later imprisons Joseph alongside those whom the king of Egypt had detained in prison. Next week, the story will continue. So in conclusion, what does this narrative tell us about God? The account of Jacob's, however, more than a story of a broken family restored. It shows how God uses the deeds of sinful people to save the world. For as Joseph said to his brother, eventually, later on we'll read, "You intend to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish and the saving of many lives." So what does it say to us? How shall we live? While some of us are living in difficult situations, maybe facing great temptations and perhaps even great hostility, but let us not lose courage that God has abandoned us. The life of Joseph shows us that God is there in every situation. He's guiding the events in our lives if we trust Him. Furthermore, like Joseph, by the grace of God, if we hold on to Him, we can continue to live for Him and be obedient to Him in virtually any situation. Happy Sabbath.